Wonderful. We're live. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Happy Thursday. Ruby here from Real Dog Box. I'm here with Dr. Ava Frick. And tonight we're going to be talking about food energetics and Ayurveda, feeding for the season, feeding for your dog's breed, which is something that's very new and interesting to me. And I know a lot of you guys follow our page where we recently talked about the different type of elements of personality. So Dr. Frick is going to shed some light on all of that for us. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you for the invitation. This is really a lot of fun to share this information and get everybody looking at life and eating and digesting from a little different perspective.
Yes, it absolutely is different. You guys may have seen Dr. Frick in one of the Pet Summits, Doggy Detox and Senior Dog Care Summits. She does speak a lot about some more holistic ways of taking care of our pets. She is also the author of Conversations with Animals. And I'm very, very thrilled to learn about your past. I have been learning about your childhood, and from the age of 3 living on a farm, knowing that you were going to work with animals. That's not everybody's story. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious if you don't mind sharing your journey from the conventional medicine and sort of this other more holistic route.
I think your point there is very well taken, that everybody somewhere along the way, when we get to this complementary style, there is some point where our life pivots and turns, or we have our aha moment. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And for me, that happened, I turned 40 and I had a child. So those happened close to the same time. And then I was playing on a women's soccer team and got hit from the side and fell in and couldn't stand up straight. And that was the first time. And here I am, like at that point, 30 years old. I go to the DO in town the next day because I still couldn't stand up straight. And he adjusts me. And I'd never been adjusted before, chiropractically, never been to a chiropractor. So that was, it was like miraculous, because I go in bent over and I come out upright. I'm going, okay, there's something about this. Wow. So that led me then into the chiropractic part of my profession, and really learning a whole lot more about biomechanics and body function and muscle and nerves. And right away, I'm into the rehab program and working with PTs to create that venue in the veterinary animal world, blending veterinarians and PTs. And then I took it another step, and growing up on a farm, I just lived 10 minutes from Ralston Purina's research farm. So I worked down there quite a bit. And I was always interested in nutrition. And we had our own garden and then working there. And so I just started looking at real food, looking at nutrients, going backwards a little bit, because before there were drugs and chemicals and things to use to affect a disease, the way diseases were determined is what's in the soil, what's toxic, what is in that body. Is there too much of something, not enough of something? It was all nutrition. So I went back to that and started looking at, okay, things are different than what it used to be. And now we've got more chemicals, there's more toxins, these bodies are struggling. I would use medication, and it wasn't, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist in some ways, like I wanted to be like perfect, right? Not just a little bit. And then we'd have those patients where you feel like the little hamster in the wheel going around and around because they're coming back all the time. I can remember this one day, still doing traditional as I'm merging, and somebody was on the schedule, and I'm going, oh man, I so hope the other doctor's available when it's their turn up, because I felt like I tried everything. It's like, open the drawer, what are we going to guess? And I was tired of that. So that took me into this whole deeper, way deep, into the realm of optimal nutrients, optimal nutrition, optimal, like what organ needs vitamin A, B, the different Bs, the Cs, the Ds, when do you use them? How's it going to help?
That's crazy. So did you start with traditional Chinese medicine? I have to tell you, I'm half Indian, and admittedly, I know the word Ayurveda, but I know nothing else beyond that. And I feel very disappointed in myself about it. But I started with the...
Oh, yeah.
This, I don't know.
4 paws, 5 directions.
Yes. And this is a wealth of information, so much so that I kind of stopped there and didn't know where to go from there. Is that where you started with the Chinese medicine?
So actually, I never did acupuncture. So the veterinarians that do acupuncture, they generally also do traditional Chinese medicine. I was more always in Western herbs, and that is more like India herbs, Western herbs.
Okay.
Part of it was that I could understand the word and I could figure out, knew what it meant. Whereas it's like, okay, but I have no idea what that is. And I just didn't take that route. And one of the reasons was because a lot of the veterinarians that I saw start with chiropractic and go into acupuncture kind of left a lot of the chiropractic behind and wasn't really as vested in it. And because I was so into the PT rehab physical therapy part, I just enjoyed it so much. And the chiropractic's like an instant response. And generally with acupuncture, which I do it for myself, but it takes time.
Right.
And so, and the herbs that I studied, and I did a 180-hour training program, and it was more Western herbs than the India herbs. So I think that was how I really got interested in Ayurveda. And I don't know, people just connect with something. And when I started looking at Ayurveda's philosophy and found an Ayurveda practitioner for myself, and then how my health improved with just a little bit of doing that. And really Ayurveda looks at, it's very similar in some ways to Chinese because, they're both ancient cultures with their medical philosophy and their wellness programs that have, eons and eons. So both of them have similars because obviously bodies are bodies and certain things are going to work better than others. But I really did enjoy looking at it from these personality traits that we get when you start looking at Ayurveda. Part of it is the doshas. So there's this tridosha, which is made up of the Vata, the Pitta, and the Kapha. And at conception, each individual is bequeathed a certain percentage of each of those. And that is your innate makeup. And as long as you can throughout life, keep that in its balance, whatever it is. It's not a third, a third, a third, although some individuals might be. But as long as you can maintain what yours is, then you stay in health. And when those start to shift too much one way or another is when disease then will appear in that individual. And so we can tell from cultures, there are certain cultures that are going to be one type of dosha more than another because where they live requires them to be comfortable in that climate. Like if you're in really, really cold climates, so Siberia, the Arctic, that you're going to have individuals that are a little more kapha type. The polar bears around and they're kaphas, walruses, anything. And the people you will see have the rounded face and the rounded body types. Well, they are okay with cold weather and they can live there better and they can hold their heat in better. And so they're set up in order to live in that environment. But you take somebody who is a tall, lean, slender individual, they would not be comfortable there. And so we see a lot of African cultures where they do have that lean body type, where you're more of the Vata, which is the runner. So who are the runners in the dog world? So you're going to have the Whippets and the Greyhounds and ones with that really a deeper chest and a leaner middle loin, the longer legs, the better oxygen capacity. But those individuals too are not going to do well in a cold climate because they don't have the insulation. But you put a lion behind them, they can get out of the way.
They're going to take off running.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. I think we often forget that all of us, being in the US, it's so diverse here that our bodies are just built differently depending on our ancestry and where we come from. And we could say the exact same things for our dogs.
Exactly.
So some of the things we're going to be talking about for our viewers that are just coming in, we're speaking with Dr. Frick about food energetics and Ayurveda and dosha, so different personalities, feeding your dog for the season, feeding for the breed, which is something that I know so little about and I'm just very, very intrigued to learn more. We're going to be chatting for about 30 minutes or so, and halfway through, we'll take any questions you guys have. So don't hesitate to comment them below. So I can pull them up. Our team did come up with some questions when they found that I was speaking to you about this topic. So I have several of my own.
Yeah, sure.
But let's jump right in. So what are energetics? What are food energetics?
So this is looking at, so the whole thing about food is that we exchange whatever is in that food for energy in the body. That is the energetics. So depending, like fats, so dogs process fats as their first energy source and carbohydrates second. People are the reverse of that. So
Mm-hmm.
dogs actually really need more fat in their diet and less carbohydrates, which is one of the things that we struggle with when dogs are fed a lot of kibble, because those tend to be more starchy, and then that throws off the digestion, that messes with the liver, and all kinds of things ensue because of that. So within each type of, so we look at the animals and the meats that they come, whether it's a fish or a bird or a quadruped on the ground, they're all different, and the way they function is different. How mentally they are is different, whether they're an herbivore or they have four stomachs. And so that all makes a difference then when of what type of quality then of energy that meat would give to the body. So one of the things that comes out of the traditional Chinese medicine are the different heats of the meats.
Mm-hmm.
So we have cool meats and we have neutral meats, and there's warm meats and there's hot meats. So hot would be like deer is hot, lamb is hot, and goat. Those are all hot meats.
So
They when you eat that, it makes a bigger furnace.
yes, so it's how the food makes us feel after eating it,
What
based
it does inside the body.
based on
Mm-hmm.
what
Yeah.
that animal is eating on their diet.
Partially it could be that, but it's more the makeup of the individual itself.
Got
And
it.
then the energy, then that when that meat is burnt, they can measure how many, basically like BTUs, it gives off.
Sure.
So in the wintertime, in a cold climate, to eat goat and lamb and venison would be like a very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, like even in areas, generally in the wintertime is when deer season is.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
they're
true.
not hunting them in the summertime because they got their babies. So that works. But like in a warm climate, so here in Arizona, where today it's 110, the last thing you want to be feeding your dog that's out there in that environment is lamb or venison or goat. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
save those for wintertime and someplace where it's cold. So neutral meats would be like beef and bison. Those are both neutral. Tuna's neutral. Salmon's neutral. Pork is a neutral meat. So those are ones that aren't necessarily cold. They're not warm. They kind of they can morph and go with a lot of different seasons
Mm-hmm.
and body types.
Got
The
it.
cooler duck is a cool, rabbit is a cool. So those are good meats then to eat in the summertime, or for a body that tends to have inflammation. So
Mm-hmm.
any kind of itis, so those dogs with really bad skin problems, they got a lot of heat inside. We don't want to chuck their furnace up with
Right.
something warm or hot. So to feed them the neutral or the cooler meats, as long as they're not otherwise sensitive to them, would be optimal to not generate more of that heat.
Sure, sure. That is something that we recommend in our consultations for people whose dogs are suffering from inflammation when we haven't quite identified if it's an environmental allergy or a food, even just an intolerance that's developed into an allergy. We generally say to steer clear of those hot proteins, but I've always thought it's okay to feed it once in a while. Is that your line of thought as well?
Well, I will say what my thing is with them is like the bulk of their meal should be those cool meats. But
Mm,
if when you want to have a variety of proteins, and if it is a hot protein that's optimal for them, otherwise that they're not sensitive to, use it as a treat. So get the freeze dried, the dehydrated of those, and use that as their treats, their rewards, training, that kind of thing. So they're getting that protein and not just isolated to the other, but it's not the bulk of their meal. So as a
sure.
treat, it's not going to really fuel them a whole lot.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mhm.
So when we talk about feeding for the season, we're saying we want to feed cooling or neutral proteins when it's hot out,
Mhm.
and the reverse when it's cooler out.
Yeah.
Um, are there any other environmental factors to consider, like
Mhm. Even vegetables.
Okay.
So if you think about any breed that would be European, any breed that originated where there are seasons, food, even the vegetables that they eat seasonally is different. So in the summertime, they're going to eat more greens. They're going to eat more leafy things. And in the wintertime, and also more fruits in the summer. In the wintertime, where when the snow's coming down and it's cold, there's not going to be as many fruits, and they're going to eat the rooted vegetables. So where they came from would have been the potatoes, the beets, the turnips, those things that were underground that they harvest them, and then they can keep them in the cellar, and that's what you eat mostly in the wintertime. So even the vegetables change. And another reason that we want to feed for the seasons too is at different times of the year, different organ systems gear up to do their job. So we want to be able to focus on those systems to work with them. So in the wintertime, where we're a seasonal individual, we're kind of like those deciduous trees, and everything goes down to the ground and you eat the roots. And then in the spring, the flow starts coming back up because you're going to get more active. So we kind of like hibernate in the winter. And then we get more active and the juices are all flowing and you're eating more greens and all these things going on. So then the endocrine system is really working better because it's not on the sleep mode anymore. So we also think about those seasonally.
Got it. I'm curious though, you mentioned some of these root vegetables like turnips or even potatoes. How does that fit into our dog's diet?
Well, first off is that they can't, so we have sweet potatoes, the beets, anything that was underground. And you would look at it in a diet for a dog that came from one of those areas originally that had seasons and had colder winters. You wouldn't necessarily give it to a dog that originated in Cuba because it's a temperate climate. They don't really have that. So their bodies minimally will shift seasonally because the seasons are very subtle, but not the degree that you would if you were in Canada, southern Canada, or in northern Europe, Switzerland, Sweden, even, like northern Germany, even Scotland and places like that where you get colder in the wintertime and the snow's coming.
Got it. Okay. So that means that if the breed is from that particular region, we really need to know historically what their background is and where they come from. I have an Anatolian Shepherd from the region of Anatolia. Won't touch vegetables or fruits with a 10-foot pole, but he absolutely loves his raw meat diet.
Yeah.
Are there any recommendations you might have for a dog from that area of the world, or even his breed, because it is more of an ancient breed?
That's right. And hasn't been in the United States as long as many of the others, like the beagle. They've been here a pretty long time. Miniature poodles been here. So over generations, they've adapted to what is here. But yeah, so you get one of those kind, and so you're going to again go back to what was it that they ate where he came from hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
And maximize on that.
Also,
when we talk about the dosha type, so an Anatolian is going to be a bit of a pitta, but also potentially could be kapha. And the kapha ones, those are the ones that hold in the heat. The pittas are the ones that are high energy. They're very, very intelligent, but they have more muscling on their bodies. The bodies are going to be the leaner ones. So an Anatolian, because of their job, can be a bit of both the pitta and the kapha. The kapha part, because that's a guardian. They worry about everybody. They're going to be protective. The pitta is going to be very job oriented, very focused, very intelligent, and they also have the muscling then to deal with whatever was in the way that they needed to get out of the way. So you can also then within those types look at, so like a kapha type, they're one of the only 3 of the doshas that actually do okay with corn. The vatas and the pittas aren't so good with handling corn. So if corn is in the diet, it's only going to really be digested well if that individual's a kapha. Fortunately, my mom, who's 87, she likes popcorn and she's a kapha, so Doesn't work for me, this Vata person at all. Too
Yeah.
dry. We don't want, Kaphas don't need more dry inside. I mean, Vatas, but the Kaphas do need to dry because they tend to retain moisture.
Okay. So how many doshas are there?
There's three: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Mhm.
Okay. And how did those compare to the traditional Chinese elements that we know, the fire, wood, metal, water?
Okay, yeah. So each of those are made up. So like the Vata is ether and air, and the
Okay.
Pitta is fire and water, and the Kapha is earth and water.
That makes more sense. But every time, we shared a post the other day, and a lot of people were like, well, mine's a little bit of this and also that. I can't just
Yeah,
choose one.
right. No, you'll be some of all three. And depending on what is your strongest trait of those three, then that creates a little bit more of that status in the body.
Makes sense. Makes
Mhm.
sense. Looks like we've got some questions coming in here. Is chicken a warming or cooling meat? Chicken's a warming, isn't it?
It is. Chicken's warm, turkey's warm, pheasant's warm. Those are all warm. So I try to use those in the spring and the fall.
Got it. Well, obviously meat is very expensive these days. And so people are sort of just buying what they can, especially those of us who are feeding a fresh food or raw diet. Any recommendations for this time of the year, just stocking up? Like what should we be doing for our dogs in particular?
Well, another way to bring in protein, so there's other protein sources. So the meat, the muscle meat, okay, that's protein. You can also have protein from the organs, so like liver, kidney, spleen. You can get protein that way, certainly heart, but heart really is a muscle meat. It's different as an organ.
Sure.
So you have that, but then you have eggs if they're fine with eggs. You have dairy if they're okay with dairy, but then you also have mung beans, kidney beans, black beans, navy beans, pinto beans. Start sounding like the guy was in that movie about the dog show. He's going on about the nuts. There's lots of beans, and those all are proteins too. Now, dogs are not going to do well as a vegetarian, so they really need some meat too, some real protein. But you can use beans as up to 25% of their
Okay.
protein content. So you can have the organs up to 25%, and you could have beans or other proteins up to 25%, and then that leaves you 50% of the protein base coming from meat. So that would be ways to kind of help fill in the gap for a little while. And then also if you check into, so on my website, I have like feeding for the dosha type, and then you can see which kinds of beans. Mung beans actually are fairly good for all three doshas, but you can see which ones do best on which beans, and then that would help you to integrate that into the diet.
On your website, so is there a test that you can take to determine what your
Uh,
dog's social personality is?
So when you log onto my site, we have it it actually pops up as a button right there at first, so it's easy for people to go to it. You click
Got
on
it.
there, and then it walks you through. Then in the end, you'll have what percentage out of 100 each of them is.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Everybody's logging off to go do that now.
it's
um,
pretty fun. And it really makes sense when you see the personality traits and how they act and how they digest. Like the pittas, a pitta dog shouldn't have any GI problems at all. Those are the ones that can go eat a dead carcass that they've drug up, that's been out there for who knows how long. It's got other creatures crawling in it, and they chew on it, and life's just hunky dory. Now, the Vata type tries to do that kind of thing. You're going to have vomiting and diarrhea all night long. And it's like, like, oh, I knew it was going to happen. Yeah. But that's a part of that type. So you can kind of match. And so if you get a pitta that has GI problems, that's an imbalance. And that needs to be then adjusted. And there's ways that can be handled
so
appropriately.
you can balance through the foods that you're feeding because of
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty
Can you
neat, huh?
walk can you walk me through like a common sort of health issue or concern that one of your patients has come to you with and you've been able to heal through energetics? Like just an example of what that looks like.
Probably one of the most common is the whole food allergy with the skin problems and the inflammation. So, they've been to their traditional veterinarian, they've been to the specialist, they've done all these tests, they've they've been on this medication, that medication. Now they've got liver problems because of the drugs that they were on. They're tired of the steroids. They come in looking like not the dog they really were. Those are very, very common. And part of my thing is still, while these things that were done was about putting out a fire, certainly inflammation is an itis, and that really is a fire. The arsonist was never found. What was the underlying reason that all this began to begin with? What is the why? And so that's the part of my program where we actually take a fur sample and send it to the laboratory, and we find out where are the minerals and are there any toxic metals, because toxic metals can create disease. Like aluminum is going to have a really good potential to create allergies, versus mercury can cause behavioral upsets. It causes aggressiveness, sporadic, unexplained behavior, outbursts, and all of that. But then just looking at these minerals, calcium and magnesium are very, very important for the muscles and the nerves. These are the calming minerals. So a majority of the dogs are low in calcium and magnesium at the tissue. So this is about what's at the tissue level that the organs and the body cells feed off of to make all of those metabolic processes work. And if something's missing or something's too high, it affects all of that. And we can find out what that is just in the hair.
That's amazing. Where are you able to tell the dogs that are showing a lot of heavy metal toxins through their hair what the culprit is? Is there some commonality?
Well, we know like where they would find that metal. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Certainly. So mercury commonly is fish. And so there have been times where the dog or the cat had been on a lot of fish. So that's going to be one of the areas that we then try to modify their diet to take that out. Aluminum is it's the one that we find the most. It is a soft metal, so it's very pliable. And it's also, I just recently learned that here where they fly the planes and they have the chemicals to try to help protect the ozone layer or whatever, that is in aluminum when they disperse that out of their plane. So now it's in the air, it's in the water, it'll be in the water that goes into the plants, and the plants go into the food, and then the dog's eating it. But the bottom line is, whether you're dog, human, or cat, or whoever it is, if the body has the right balance of the nutrients and everything that needs to be plugged into all these receptors, there's no place for those toxins to go. So while you might be exposed to them, they just go away. They come in, they go out. They have no place to stick. So these toxic metals become a square peg in a round hole. And that's the catch.
Yeah.
And then they start driving the body instead of the body driving itself.
Right.
Now, these things are causing and creating a lot of the problems that we see as a medical condition.
Sure. I mean, and it sounds like it's ubiquitous. Like we're ingesting all of that as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of the health issues that we're seeing in ourselves are now, mirrored in our dogs. And it's like, what's going on?
Because they're all living in the same environment.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Okay. I'm going to pull up some questions here that we had people send in. Several questions about different cooling and warming proteins. So this is an interesting one. If you feed warm and cool proteins together, does that equal neutral?
Well, yeah, the warm would tend to want to warm you up and the cool would want to cool you down. So somewhere in between there, you could potentially be at a neutral spot. Yeah, I would say that it could end up that way.
Sort of canceling each other out. But this is back to the beans. Legumes are not a good source unless you need to substitute meat protein due to illness reasons. So you mentioned that it can make up to 25% of your
right. And you're not just gonna put the beans in there dry. That's where the legumes can be. There's a lot of other about legumes too, depending on of all the different types of diets that people eat. But legumes do have protein in them, and you need to soak them. You're not just gonna take dried beans or peas or whatever and put them in the food. You're going to soak them and treat them, and that's part of what helps break down the parts of the legumes that can interfere with digestion otherwise. So as long as they're handled properly, And it's not your only thing that you're adding in there. They certainly can be, and you can buy organic versus non-organic. There's
Yeah.
all different ways that you can ensure that it's going to be a little bit safer or better. But for those, there's some dogs that we get that when we run the scans for the antigens on the allergies, there may only be two meats that they can have. Now,
Hmm.
the other thing that is out there is there's companies, Jiminy is one, that is coming up with protein sources that's grubs and crickets. So
Yeah.
dogs do eat bugs, and a lot of bugs in African countries and Egypt, and those dogs eat lots of bugs and dates and things like that. So you can go that route too to try to help.
Sure. Yeah. Cricket protein is very popular these days. Why do some body parts, like organs, have a different energy than muscle meat? It's an interesting question.
Well, they're not muscle. Or like liver, it has a capsule around it, but it has a totally different makeup. It's not muscle. So they're different. Just like, why does an orange not taste like a carrot
Mm,
or an apple? Say, because they're both fruits. So you could say, well, they're both fruits, but why
yeah.
is an orange not like an apple? Because they're different.
You mentioned a little earlier about feeding for the organ system. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So that's where you get into Chinese, like heals like. So philosophy is if you have a liver problem, then to eat liver could potentially offer up something that your liver does not have, is not making, genetically can't do, it's missing something, that if you eat that liver, it could potentially then provide to you those
Hmm.
missing entities that would help your liver. Same way with the kidney, same way with the heart, same way with the lungs, that like heals like.
Is there something within Ayurveda that follows that similarly?
No, not exactly. Not like the Chinese medicine does.
Got it. There's a woman here in North County, San Diego, that practices yoga with our
Hmm.
dogs. Speaks a lot about the different energies that we bring and oftentimes sort of pass on to our dogs when we carry that stress home.
Hmm.
Is that something that you're familiar with?
Oh, you see it all the time working with an animal, especially dogs, because dogs are so attached to their people and they fret. And then they're, depending also what breed they are, if they're one of those protectors, like the Vata ones, they're going to be okay, all right. But if you get into that Kapha type that's really uh, the one that wants everybody to be happy, wants it all to be good, or the
Mhm.
Pitta that has that job of then also taking care, but not from that same worry happy level. It's a little bit different that I've got this job. But if the person is stressed, then a lot of times the animals will develop that stress, and stress is also very similar in the body to what inflammation is. So it wears on the endocrine system, the adrenal glands start suffering, body metabolism is altered, digestion is shut down. And a lot of times the clients will laugh, they go, oh, when we start talking about what's going on with the dog, oh, it's the same thing I got. Then I work up a program for the dog is like, can I do this for myself too?
Yeah, it's not any different. In fact, I just came back from a doctor's appointment with my partner Turk, and he's suffering from some seasonal allergies. And her recommendation was to stay away from foods that are inflammatory, cut out the sugars and the starches. And I'm like, you know this already. You're preaching to the
Right,
choir here.
right. Yeah. Yeah, don't fuel the fire.
Right, right. It looks like we have a breed specific question. Hopefully this is one you can answer. What kind of foods should I feed our pug? Where does a pug fall in the dosha?
Kapha. The kapha is going to be more of a pug is going to be more of a kapha. They got the little rounded heads and little rounded bodies, and they got that extra skin, and they're happy go lucky. And yes, they're definitely not going to outrun somebody, and they're not going to worry about like a pit bull that they're going to defend their space. They'll talk and whatever, but they're a kapha type. They tend to then retain fluids, have heart conditions, that kind of thing. So you would feed the pug, and again, as long as there aren't food sensitivities, you would feed them for the kapha dosha mostly. And then they do come from where there would be mild seasons. So you might have little temperate changes, but it's not going to be like real hot in the summer and real cold in the winter. So they wouldn't necessarily eat rooted.
Got
Yeah.
it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions I have is, what food would you recommend for a dog that has joint issues?
Well, so the joint really is going to be just not feeding the things that are going to add to the heat. So you'd want to try to do the cooler foods. Yeah.
Steer
You
clear of
have it that
inflammatory.
way. Yeah. And, dogs are not so much about buying a bag of Oreos and eating the whole thing in 2 nights. No, it's not. You'll give them a little bit of your Oreo, but mostly you ate all of them. So they're not going to tend to have as many of those sugary things. But you do have to watch out when you're feeding treats and snacks, because there was one the other day somebody showed me. Not only did it have, like, it had sugar in it, but it also had red dye in it.
Mm,
So, like, the dogs, that's neither of those things do they need. I always go, just feed them dehydrated meat.
yeah,
Those kinds of things is better than getting into the treats that have the sugar. They don't need that.
they don't. And they don't care what color it is.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the dyes, the little round things that are green, that's not for the dog's benefit. That's for the human's benefit to make it look like a pea. But it's not a pea anyway. So, yeah.
Speaking of treats, can I use real dog treats to implement cooling or warming foods for my dog? I feed kibble, so I'd like to learn more.
So one of the things I say about feeding the kibble, if you are going to feed kibble, then go to a baked kibble rather than extruded. There's like 22 companies now that make a baked kibble, and I think probably every few months there's going to be some more. So the baked kibble it's not gone through the extrusion process, so the starches are not going to be so high. It doesn't change the carbs to this really high starch content. And it's all of that changes. Like, they worry about the dogs a few years ago that developed the heart problems but what about all these dogs that have diabetes? The dog shouldn't have
Right.
diabetes. If their carbohydrate, sugar, if all of that is below 25% of their diet, you wouldn't be buying insulin and doing all of this. So go to baked kibble. That'll be a huge change for the dog. And then, yes, so you can add any of those meats. You can use them as toppers. There's a raw that you can add in. You can buy your own meats. You can add freeze dried to that. There's a lot of different ways you can add in the other proteins. And again, eggs you can use, cheese you can use. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What about air dried and dehydrated foods? Is that
Yep,
the
that's
next
so
step?
good. That's real good.
Yeah,
Right. So that's now, generally those are also a little more expensive than what the kibbles would be. But those are very, very good alternatives. I mean, it's almost like being raw. It's just that you don't have to keep it in the freezer and all the liquid's been taken out of it.
right,
So those
right.
are like Ziwi Peak is an air dried, and that's
Mm-hmm.
a really, really good food. Or you just use it as your treat or your topper.
Right. Or you make it yourself. You know,
There
we
you
we
go.
do a workshop every weekend or every month, and there's one coming up this weekend on how to make your food at home. And it's a lot easier than people think it is, but it is
Yeah.
overwhelming when you're just seeing these like really fancy bowls
Yeah.
online of. But I always tell people that that's your best bet. I recommend adding in fresh food as much
Mhm.
as possible.
Yeah.
You obviously or you're going to throw off your dog's stool if you just chuck in a whole pound of hamburger meat. So don't do that, but definitely add some real food and real treats into their diet.
Well, the other thing too is when you start that with them when they're young and you start giving them variety, what that does is create a much better microbiome. You've expanded your friends and family plan inside the gut. So now, as this dog ages, they can eat a lot of different things because they have the ability to adapt as it comes and goes and changes internally when you're doing it regularly every day of the week. They can get something different. It doesn't have to just be the same thing. But for these dogs that have only been fed one kind of kibble for 5 years, and now something happens and they can't find what to feed them because everything is making diarrhea, well, their microbiome is so minimal It's
Hmm.
very narrow. They don't have variety. And so they have nowhere to go. And you
Right.
struggle and struggle with the probiotics and all the other things that happen trying to get that gut back in a stable place. And it may never be the same. So start out early, giving them all this variety, and it won't be a problem, even if they're not a pitta with the gut of iron.
Sure, sure. Let's talk about this statement real quick. My blank breed has a sensitive stomach. So where you talked a little bit about food energetics for and feeding for a specific breed based on, where that breed comes from. But do you hear that blanket statement a lot? My German Shepherd has a sensitive stomach. Oh, I've got a Frenchie and they've got a sensitive stomach. How do you respond to that?
Well, first off, the two breeds you just mentioned, they can potentially, because of their doshas, have some of those issues. But again, if it's all balanced and everything's in the right proportions, it shouldn't be a problem. And yes, there's lots of GI. I mean, there's lots of sensitivity. Just means the dog has had vomiting and or diarrhea with some frequency on and off for quite a bit of its lifetime. That's what that tells me.
Hmm.
And so then I look at, okay, what's responsible for that? It could be a liver thing. The liver has 1,500 jobs. So it's going to prioritize, what do I have to do? What do I need to do? And what gets put on the side burner? 1,500 jobs. So the liver can oftentimes, like I've had animals come in and they've been working on the pancreas, working on the intestines and that, and totally miss the part that the liver actually has a whole lot of jobs with digestion. And
Sure.
once we handle the liver, and that doesn't mean the blood tests could be normal. This is where the problem comes in. You can run tests, and if there's not active liver destruction, then the ALT, the ALP, the GGT, all those numbers are not going to be elevated. They're going to be fine. They go, okay, it's not the liver.
Mm.
Not so. There's still a lot of jobs that that test isn't telling you about. So oftentimes it's getting that liver and gallbladder stabilized, and then those sensitivities will go away.
How do you do that through food?
Well, so there's several different parts to how I do it. So, yeah, I use kinesiology a lot. So I do kinesiology as energetics. So I use biofrequency analysis, like muscle testing. And so I can use that to get a better handle on, is the problem coming from the stomach? Well, first off, it starts with the parotid gland. You have to have enough saliva that's alkaline that gets to the stomach that helps keep that pH buffered.
Hmm.
So an individual that's really sympathetic dominant, always in that fight or flight, that's like when you're on stage and you get cotton mouth. Okay, this has been shut down. And that's what happens when you're nervous a lot. The gut is automatically shut down. So sometimes the first part is trying to get the adrenal glands and that whole endocrine system out of this sympathetic dominant fight or flight stage, because until you get that removed, nothing that you do in the gut's going to work right. You could be feeding the most wonderful program, but if it's shut down because of sympathetic dominance, it don't matter. So parotid, saliva to stomach. So we got the parotid, the stomach, the liver. The stomach produces antibodies. It also produces signals that tell the liver to get ready, the gallbladder to get ready, the pancreas to get ready. So they're not surprised. So they're all geared up as the food comes. Well, if they don't get that signal because the stomach's all in a knot because the dog's nervous, then they're not ready when it gets there. So now it ends up in the duodenum and moving on into the ileum, and it hasn't been pre-processed.
Hmm.
So it moves on down, but we've also got the sympathetic dominant state. So even once it gets there, the gut's not moving right. It's not about absorption. It's about get it out of here because I need to weigh less because I'm going to have to run fast. So
So
now
it's
you
just
have
kind of
diarrhea.
the body, get rid of it, get it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. So we have to figure out what part of this problem is mental
Right.
that feeds the adrenal glands the wrong signal that then creates the stop in the gut. And what part of it is really which part? Is it the stomach doesn't have enough enzymes? We can even tell that on a hair test. I can tell by certain mineral levels. Are they digesting their protein okay or
Hmm.
not? Do they need enzymes or probiotics? How do they handle sugars and carbs? All that's on that test. So we have to find out then which part of this is it. So then does it start in the parotid? Is it the stomach? Is it the liver? Is it the gallbladder? Is it the pancreas? Is it the small intestine? Is it the colon? So energetically through frequencies, I can measure those and then know which is the priority. And again, if we go after the main one, all those other little things go away.
Yeah. I don't know much about that. Is it microcurrent therapy? Is that what it's?
Well, that's a therapeutic device, but that's for treating like pain and anxiety and muscle soreness or things like that. Now, it does when the ear clips are applied. So we do the cranial electrotherapy part of that microcurrent. We're talking about alpha stem. That does raise the parasympathetic and bring down the sympathetic. So you're exactly spot on about that. So you can use that application to help support the endocrine system and take that fear factor out of there. Yes. And that will improve digestion, improves the pH of the stomach because it's created more saliva.
Sure. Yeah, no, we did a live with Dr. Connor Brady, and he talks a lot about gut health, dysbiosis, dogs that are stressed because, maybe the environment they're in, especially the dogs that are, taken to shelters to be rehomed, like that's just uncomfortable. Those dogs are not eating. They don't have the best diet. It's just it's all downhill after that. Wow, that's fascinating. We've got time for, I think, one more question here. Is there anything for muscle weakness? I feed raw.
So the raw part's good. The muscle weakness, I mean, that can happen from age. It can happen from neurologic problems. So depending on where the muscle weakness is, if the dog hasn't been chiropractically adjusted, if the nerves are not going to the muscles because there's a subluxation and the electrical potential is stopped, kind of like kinking the hose, and it can't all get there, then there will be muscle weakness that appears like poor muscle tone. Now, there certainly can be muscle weakness like other reasons that the nerve input is not going to the muscles. So we look at nutrients like folic acid is really, really important for nerve conductivity. Certain B vitamins for nerve conductivity. You could take those nutrients, but if there's subluxations, it's still not going to get through. And then certainly there's muscle weakness from too much cortisol, which is like being on prednisone. And that happens when the adrenal glands are always getting that 911 signal, keep pushing that button. They produce cortisol. Finally, muscle weakness happens because of that and poor protein assimilation. So there's a lot of different reasons it can be there. And then each of those, depending on what they are, would require a different solution to change that muscle weakness. But there's also certain exercises that can be done that help improve that muscle tone too. So you can say, well, the body's old. Okay, sure. But if you've checked off all your other boxes, there are exercises that you can do to help improve muscle tone.
Sure. Wow, you are a wealth of information. If someone wanted to do a consult with you, is that something you offer by phone or online?
So I do a lot of virtual appointments, and my website is avafrick.com. And so I have a specific virtual section, and then anybody that's interested can kind of look at what goes on, look at all the other areas of my website and get an idea of kind of like what we've been talking about. Where do I start and where do I go and what are my considerations? But we can do that. And I have people send me photos, cheek swabs, fur samples. Sometimes I've used ear swabs. Sometimes I've used urine, feces, different things, just so I get a good DNA perspective of that individual.
Yeah. Wow. So Tracy, I know you have a question about your pug and feeding a little bit more in more detail. So you can reach Dr. Frick on her website, and everyone can also take that dosha personality test. I'm going to head over right now and take. I'm dying to know. Looks like we covered all of our questions, and we're just about out of time. I just wanted to thank you again for joining us on our live, and hopefully once we have more information about that hair analysis test that you mentioned, is it CheckPup?
Checkpup.com, right. So people who want to get a general overview, we just launched that company in May, checkpup.com, and it's based on doing a hair analysis and using my nutritional survey. We put all that together with information that the pet parent gives us and gives them an action plan of where to start to try to work through some of these issues that they've had. And sometimes just you want to get your pup started off healthy and make sure that they go through life in a good state and
Sure.
avoid that cancer so many of them get to. So
Yeah.
it can be used for that too. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. All right. I just shared her website below. So make sure you guys check that out. And thanks again.
Thank you for this opportunity. And Peaches, my dog, says thank you for her real dog box.
Oh, our pleasure. Bye, guys. Have a good night.